I took the night shift because I needed the money, not because I liked the silence. Sector C of the distribution warehouse was practically a graveyard. After 11 p.m., no foot traffic, no radio chatter, just rows of steel shelves stacked with forgotten inventory. Most employees refused to work there. They said it was too far from the security cameras, too easy to disappear. I thought they were being dramatic. The company offered me double pay for overnight inventory audits, and I figured a little quiet would help me finish faster. But from my first week, I started noticing things. Crates that had been sealed for years suddenly appeared open. Items on the inventory list marked as destroyed were sitting neatly back on the shelves. Sometimes I heard footsteps echoing in the next aisle, slow, deliberate, but when I peeked around, no one was there. The only other person on shift was an older janitor named Henry who worked near the docks. One night, I asked him about Sector C. He went quiet. Then he said, "I don't clean past row 9. If you're smart, you won't either." He didn't explain, just walked away. I should have listened. It was around 2:17 a.m. when the scanner froze. I was logging inventory in row 12, the deepest part of Sector C, and the handheld device just stopped responding. The screen flickered, then went dark. I sighed, figuring the battery had died, and turned to head back toward the charging station. That's when I heard a loud clang. It wasn't far, just a few aisles over, like a metal pole had fallen. I froze, my ears straining. Then I heard it again, clang closer this time. I started moving fast, trying to make it back toward the main corridor. But the rows were longer than I remembered, or maybe I was just moving in circles. The layout suddenly felt wrong. That's when I saw the crate. It had been closed when I walked past it minutes ago. Now the lid was slid halfway open. I approached slowly, the light from my flashlight jittering. Inside, there was a roll of shrink wrap and something else. A name tag. My name tag. I was still wearing mine. This one was old, rusted around the edges, with the ink faded almost completely. I backed away and nearly tripped over a pallet. The sound I made must have alerted something, because suddenly, I heard breathing. Just beyond the shelf. Deep, steady, too loud to be mine. I stood perfectly still, watching a long shadow pass across the grated floor under the shelf. Then it stopped and turned toward me. I didn't breathe. The flashlight in my hand began to tremble, its beam shaking violently across the floor and flickering against the steel support beams. That shadow didn't move at first. It just lingered behind the slats of shelving, as if watching, judging. Then, slowly, it stepped forward. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a man, or something shaped like one. Tall, impossibly lean, wearing a warehouse uniform identical to mine down to the name tag. Only, the name tag read E. Simmons, the guy who vanished in 2009. They never found his body. Only a torn vest and his scanner, deep in Sector C. My manager always said it was an incident, nothing more. But this thing was wearing Simmons' vest, but its skin looked waxy and gray, like someone left a mannequin in the sun for too long. Its eyes were wide and milky, the whites completely overtaking the iris, and its mouth hung slightly open as if stuck mid-scream. I bolted. The rows twisted around me, impossibly long, like a maze rearranging itself with every turn. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but it never ran. It just walked, slowly, steadily, always keeping pace, always knowing which corner I'd take next. My feet slapped against the concrete as I finally reached a break in the shelving, the central corridor where the emergency exit sat, a glowing red light over a steel door. I ran to it and slammed my palm against the push bar. Nothing. It didn't open. I hit it again and again. Nothing. That's when I saw the sign someone had taped over the glass panel. "This exit is no longer in service." My breath fogged up the glass, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Behind me, I heard the faint dragging of feet, slow and rhythmic, echoing against the tall ceilings like a death knell. I spun around and the thing was standing at the edge of the light, half in shadow, half exposed, still smiling that slack, open-mouthed grin. I screamed. Then I noticed something worse, the security cameras lining the upper beams, aimed right at me. The red lights on all of them were blinking, recording, watching. But who was watching? The feed wasn't going to security. There hadn't been a guard here in months. They laid them off during budget cuts. I was alone with it. And something was keeping a record. I don't remember making the decision to run back into the maze of shelves, but I did. Anything was better than standing by that locked door with those cameras blinking down on me. I ducked into row 7, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, my breath ragged and uneven. The thing followed. I could hear its slow steps, deliberate and unhurried, like it knew I'd never find the way out. I sprinted past pallets and stacks of unopened boxes, turning corners without thinking, hoping to confuse it, but each time I looked back, it was closer. It didn't run, it just closed the distance. At some point, I heard a voice. Not a normal voice. It was like a recording played through a broken speaker. "You shouldn't be here." The sound didn't even match its mouth, which opened and closed out of sync, as if rehearsing a speech it couldn't quite remember. My legs were on fire, my chest tight, when I finally stumbled into the janitor's area near the dock. Henry was there, mop in hand, frozen as he saw me burst through the door. "It's here," I gasped, pointing toward the aisle behind me. He didn't ask what it was. He just muttered, "Row 9, I told you," before grabbing my arm and dragging me toward the dock door. He shoved a heavy key into the lock, a key I didn't even know existed, and forced the door open. Cold night air hit my face like a slap. I stumbled out onto the empty loading bay as Henry slammed the door shut and bolted it. I stood there, bent over, trying not to vomit, the sound of that voice still echoing in my ears. The next day, I went to my supervisor and told her I couldn't work night shifts anymore. I didn't explain, she didn't ask. She just looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Nobody lasts more than 2 weeks in Sector C. You lasted 8 days. Consider yourself lucky." I quit the following morning. 2 weeks later, Henry called me from a blocked number. His voice was trembling. He told me they'd found another open crate in row 12. Inside was my flashlight, the same one I dropped that night. Only now, it was bent in half, like someone had folded it with bare hands. It started during the final week of July. When the heat outside was so unbearable, our office's old ventilation unit worked overtime just to keep things tolerable. I was working the night shift at a roadside motel, not a glamorous job, but it paid decently, and I liked the quiet. My job was simple: check in late guests, monitor the cameras, and make sure no one trashed the place. The manager, Mr. Klein, was out for the week attending a funeral in Nebraska, so I was technically in charge, even though that just meant locking the back door and double-checking inventory. On Tuesday night, around 1:15 a.m., I saw something strange on the security feed. Camera 3, which faced the hallway on the second floor, showed a man walking slowly past the rooms wearing a collared shirt, name tag, and khakis. He looked eerily like Mr. Klein. Same posture, same odd gait. I blinked and stared, but Mr. Klein was out of state. Confused, I rewound the feed and froze the frame. The name tag wasn't clear, but it looked identical to his. Still, I convinced myself it was probably a guest wandering or someone from housekeeping mistakenly working a double. I radioed housekeeping just to be safe. No answer. Then I checked the log. There were no check-ins after 11:00 p.m., and all guests were accounted for. So who was that? I got up and walked the second floor myself. Every door was shut. No noise. I knocked lightly on a few, but no one answered, probably asleep. I went to where the figure was last seen on the feed and looked around. Nothing. Just old carpet and flickering lights. Still, I felt watched, like someone was behind me. I turned back down the hallway, and that's when I saw it again, a figure standing near the vending machine at the far end. I called out, "Sir, do you need help?" No answer. The figure took a step back, half slipping into the shadows. I walked quickly toward it, I don't know why. Maybe I thought it was a guest in distress. But when I rounded the corner, no one was there. Just the humming vending machine and that faint smell of citrus cleaner. I went back to the desk and rewound the camera again. This time I zoomed in as much as I could. The face, it wasn't Mr. Klein. Not exactly. But it was close. Too close. Like a distorted copy. The cheeks were too sunken, the eyes just a little too wide, and the smile, it wasn't friendly. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe a guest found an old uniform and decided to mess with me. But there were no records of missing uniforms. I texted Mr. Klein to ask if anyone else might be coming by to check in on the place. He replied 5 minutes later. Nobody should be there but you. At around 3:02 a.m., every light in the building flickered at once. Not just a flicker, they pulsed, as if the motel was breathing in. Then the power snapped. Everything went dark. The hum of the vending machine, the ceiling fans, even the backup hallway lights all died. The only light came from the emergency flood lamp above the front desk, casting this ugly pale beam into the lobby. My phone was on the charger, dead. The air was still, suffocating. That's when I heard the creak of a door, not mine, from upstairs, then another, then several. It sounded like every door on the second floor was opening, slowly, in sequence. I stood up, heart pounding, and instinctively grabbed the flashlight from the drawer. I clicked it on and stepped into the stairwell. At the top of the stairs, I paused. All the doors were wide open, all 12 rooms. And at the end of the hallway stood the man again, not moving, his uniform crisp, his eyes locked on mine. I whispered, "Who are you?" He didn't move, didn't speak, but his mouth stretched slowly into a wide smile, unnatural, too wide for a human face. I stepped back, and he started walking toward me, not running, just a calm, deliberate pace. I turned and bolted down the stairs, not even bothering to turn off the flashlight. I locked myself in the office, heart racing, hands shaking. Through the window in the office door, I saw him stop at the bottom of the stairs. He stood there, smiling, and then he turned and walked back upstairs. When the power came back at 3:23 a.m., all the room doors were closed again. The following morning, I barely said a word as Mr. Klein returned. I half expected him to laugh, tell me it was some elaborate prank or local legend. But instead, he just stared at me when I mentioned the man, the one in the uniform, the power outage, the doors. Slowly, his face drained of color. "You saw him?" he asked, barely above a whisper. I nodded. He walked over to the office cabinet and pulled out an old Polaroid, a staff photo from years ago. The man was in it, same uniform, same unsettling smile. "That's Daniel," Mr. Klein said. "He worked here before me. Found dead in one of the rooms. Suicide. He was alone on the night shift. I asked if anyone else had ever reported seeing him. He didn't answer. Just told me I was off for the next week, and he'd cover shifts personally for a while. I took the offer. I never went back. But sometimes I check the motel's security feed online. Mr. Klein keeps some of it public. One night, I caught a glimpse. Just for a second. A man in a pale blue shirt standing at the top of the stairs, smiling, watching. It was my first job out of college, an overnight position as a security assistant at a corporate high-rise downtown. The building was a glass and steel monument to some faceless financial firm. I didn't care who owned it, I just needed to pay rent. The job was simple. Monitor the front desk, keep track of who entered after hours, and occasionally do floor sweeps. But there was one rule. I was not to go to the 17th floor, ever. Not for routine patrols. Not for fire drills. Not even if the system flagged motion there. It was written clearly in the employee handbook and emphasized during training. 17 is sealed off, my supervisor said. Used to be R, D, or legal. Now it's unused. Doesn't matter. Stay out. I didn't question it. People joked about it in the break room. Called it the ghost floor or Hell's Cubicles. Some said someone died up there. Some said it was soundproofed for sensitive reasons, but most just ignored it. We had 30 other floors to worry about. For months, nothing happened. Occasionally, the elevator panel would blink 17 briefly around 3 a.m. before correcting itself. The IT guy blamed a firmware bug. Once or twice, I'd hear what sounded like rolling chairs above me when I was on 16, but there was never anyone scheduled. I logged it, shrugged, and moved on. Then, in June, a new alert system was installed. It was sensitive, too sensitive really. Every shift, it would blip once or twice, especially around 17. I reported the false positives. They sent a tech. He found nothing. But one night, around 2:48 a.m., the camera feed from the 17th floor flickered on. It wasn't supposed to exist, but it was there, static, then a frame. Long rows of cubicles drenched in red emergency light. One chair was slowly spinning. I blinked. The feed vanished. I rewound the log, nothing. I checked the physical panel's no listing for 17, but I'd seen it. And that night, I made the worst decision of my life. I took the elevator up. I stepped inside the elevator with my badge still clipped to my shirt, heart pounding harder than I expected. The panel didn't show a button for 17, but as the doors began to close, I held my finger to the emergency override and quickly pressed the blank space between 16 and 18. It shouldn't have worked, but the elevator jerked, paused, and then started moving. There was no ding, no floor announcement, just silence. When the doors slid open, I immediately noticed the air. It wasn't stale, it was too still, like stepping into a vacuum. The overhead lights were dimmed, almost pinkish, as if stuck in emergency mode. Every workstation had an old terminal glowing faint green, showing nothing but blinking cursors. No chairs, no personal belongings, no dust. Just rows and rows of perfectly aligned desks, each facing the same direction. I stepped out cautiously. The floor beneath my boots didn't echo like tile or carpeted absorbed sound, like it was padded with foam. Even the ceiling tiles looked thicker. I walked to the nearest cubicle. The screen showed one word: listening. That's when I heard it. A soft rhythmic tapping too slow to be a machine. I froze. Then it stopped. I looked down the hallway of cubicles empty. I took a few more steps. Tap, tap, tap. I turned around. One of the terminals had gone black. Another blinked. Then another. It was like they were reacting to me. Then came the whispering. Not in my ears, but in my head. Faint, like a voice pressed against the other side of a wall. I backed up slowly, trying to remember how far the elevator was. But the hallway didn't look the same. There were more desks now. The way behind me looked longer than it had been. The whispering grew clearer, words I didn't understand, syllables that didn't match. I looked around desperately and then saw it. A dark smudge on the floor, like something heavy had been dragged. It led into a side conference room, one I didn't remember from the blueprints. I should have turned around. I should have hit the emergency radio. But I stepped toward it. I don't know why. Something about it felt magnetic, as if I had to see what was inside. And what I saw confirmed that this floor had never been shut down, it had been sealed. The door to the conference room groaned as I pushed it open. It was heavier than it looked, and when it gave way, the smell hit me first, not rot, not mildew, but something mechanical and wrong, like scorched circuits and blood on warm metal. Inside, there was no table, no chairs, just a single reclined examination bed in the center, surrounded by what looked like outdated surveillance equipment, CRT monitors stacked like totems, wires snaking across the carpetless floor, and microphones pointed inward like they were trying to interrogate the bed itself. On the far wall, a whiteboard, smeared with unreadable scribbles and fingerprint smudges, stood crookedly. A single phrase etched deep in red marker beneath it all. He's still here. That's when I noticed something impossible. The reflection on the nearest monitor, it wasn't showing me. I was standing in the center of the room, staring right at it, and yet the screen showed someone else in my place. They wore my uniform. They had my badge, but their face was wrong. Asymmetrical, hollow eyes, an almost human smile stretched too far. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a coiled wire. And the moment I did, the room went dark. Every screen went black. The whispering returned louder this time. Angry. Not inside my head anymore, but pressing against every wall of the room. And then I heard the elevator ding outside the conference room. I ran back into the cubicle maze. But the path was even longer now, hallways that weren't there before. Walls closing in. Terminals began flashing violently. One screen said, "Run." Another, "He knows." I turned a corner and saw the elevator, but someone was inside already. A figure standing with their back to me. Identical uniform, same posture, same height. I screamed for them to hold the door. They didn't move. I sprinted. The doors began to close. As I reached out, the figure inside turned their head slightly toward me, and it was my face. Except the mouth was opening, wider than it should have. I felt my feet hit the floor hard as I dove forward. But I didn't land in the elevator. I landed on tile white, flickering, buzzing with fluorescent lights. I was back in the security office, alone. The clock said 3:17 a.m. My supervisor was radioing in, asking why the elevator had activated on its own. I stared at the monitors. Every feed was normal. Floor 17 wasn't listed. I didn't say a word. I didn't file a report. I didn't mention the footage. I didn't even try to explain why I looked so pale when the morning shift arrived. Because the thing is, I couldn't explain it. I tried to tell myself I was sleep-deprived, hallucinating, that maybe I'd wandered into a space used for high-clearance testing. But deep down, I knew the truth had nothing to do with security clearance or blueprints. That floor shouldn't have existed. That thing wearing my face, it wasn't a malfunction. It was waiting, watching. And somehow, it had used my curiosity as a doorway. Over the next few nights, I noticed strange things, small at first. The security monitors would flicker at 3:17 a.m. No signal loss, just static for a moment. And only in the camera facing the elevators. Then, one morning, I came in to find my shift had been reassigned, no explanation. My new schedule never put me near the upper floors. I didn't argue. I kept my mouth shut. But I started having dreams always the same. Me, standing in front of the elevator, the doors opening, and that version of me reaching out, beckoning, mouthing something I could never quite hear. One night, I woke up to find a printed photo slid under my apartment door. It was grainy, low-res, clearly taken from a security feed. It showed me standing alone on the 17th floor. I wasn't moving. I wasn't looking at anything. I was just standing there. But here's the thing, I never went back. Not once. That photo shouldn't exist. And I wasn't wearing my normal uniform. I was wearing what the other me had worn. I threw it in the trash and tried to forget. But every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I'll feel that same cold silence I felt on that floor. I'll hear the faint hum of static. And in the deepest part of me, I know that floor didn't let me leave. It just let me think I had. Because some nights, I catch myself in the mirror and for a split second, I swear the reflection lags behind.